Okay, so let's unpack this. We are diving headfirst into what looks like a really dynamic and rapidly intensifying situation in the Middle East.
Absolutely. It's moving fast.
Our source material today, it's from recent CBS News excerpts, dated June 17th, 2025. And our mission here is really to cut through the noise,
Right.
give you a comprehensive understanding of this escalating conflict between Israel and Iran. It's now day 4 of what sources are calling open warfare.
Open warfare. That's a significant description.
Yeah, so we're going to look at the specific events, the stated motivations on both sides, the human impact, which is pretty stark already,
Devastatingly so.
and, the complex international reactions that are shaping this whole critical moment.
And it's not just a recap, right? It's about trying to connect the dots, see the bigger picture, and really understand the implications of these, well, dramatic developments.
Exactly. And what's particularly striking right off the bat, when you look at Israel's actions, it's their dramatic strike on Iranian state television.
It's the Islamic Republic of Iran News Network, yeah.
Right. The sources describe an explosion actually happening during a live broadcast.
Yeah.
The anchor, Sahar Amami, reportedly rushed off camera. Debris, smoke everywhere.
And she later reported seeing bodies of reporters at the site. That's incredibly direct.
Incredibly direct. Images showed smoke, flames. I mean, this wasn't just hitting a military target, was it? What is hitting a major media outlet, live on air, signal?
Well, that's a crucial observation. Targeting state media like that, it goes beyond just infrastructure damage. It's a huge psychological blow.
How so?
Well, it disrupts their official narrative immediately, right? It creates panic, and it demonstrates air superiority in a very, very visible way, right in the capital. It sends a crystal clear message about capability and, frankly, the willingness to strike right at the heart of Iran's public sphere.
And that strike, it happened alongside Israel, warning people in central Tehran to evacuate.
Right.
Up to 330,000 people.
A massive number.
Yeah, a huge area. It includes the state TV building itself, police headquarters, and 3 large hospitals. One of those hospitals is actually owned by Iran's Revolutionary Guard.
Right, the IRGC. So that's a major displacement warning. It's clearly designed to ramp up the pressure.
Exactly. You combine the direct strike on a symbol of national communication with this mass evacuation warning.
It signals an intent not just for physical damage, but also to disrupt civilian life, communication, maybe force a decision, or just incite widespread fear.
And it reinforces that claim they made, right? Full aerial superiority over Tehran. Defense Minister Katz warned Tehran residents would pay the price.
Pretty blunt language.
Very. And Israel is quite specific about the scale. They say their strikes involve 50 fighter jets, destroyed over 120 surface-to-surface missile launchers.
And they're claiming that's 1/3 of Iran's arsenal.
1/3. That's a big claim. And these attacks primarily targeted Iran's Quds Force.
Right, the Quds Force. For anyone unfamiliar, that's the elite foreign operations branch of the Revolutionary Guard.
And Israel's justification for all this is very clear. They say it's necessary to stop Iran getting a nuclear weapon.
Prime Minister Netanyahu claimed Iran was racing toward one, said these strikes have set their nuclear program back a very, very long time.
Okay, but here's a complexity. The U.S. assessment, at least previously, was that Iran hadn't actively pursued a weapon since 2003. But they do have the capacity to build weapons quickly. So what does that mean for these strikes? Are they destroying capacity? Changing intent? Both.
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, the sources say Israel's stated goal is setting back their nuclear program. That sounds like targeting capacity facilities, launchers, maybe enrichment sites.
Right.
But the intent part, that's always been murky. If Iran chooses not to build a weapon but has the capability, destroying capability is one strategy. But if the intent changes down the line, well, new capabilities can always be developed. It's this constant strategic chess match, isn't it, between what Iran could do and what Israel is trying to prevent them from doing.
A very dangerous chess match. Now, Israel's actions were dramatic, but Iran's response was, well, predictable, swift and forceful. Another wave of missiles hit Israel.
And the Israeli military reported those killed at least 8 civilians.
8 civilians. Meanwhile, Iran announced it launched about 100 missiles in that wave and vowed more retaliation for what they called Israel's sweeping attacks. Tehran says those attacks have killed at least 224 people in Iran since Friday.
And their health authorities are reporting 1,277 wounded inside Iran.
But there's a discrepancy there, isn't there?
There is. A Washington-based group, human rights activists, they suggest that's a significant undercount. They've documented over 400 killed. including 197 civilians.
Wow.
That gap in numbers, it's a critical part of the information war that always happens. Makes getting a clear picture really difficult in the middle of active fighting.
That's a really important point. And Iran's Revolutionary Guard, they certainly haven't backed down. They're vowing future strikes will be more forceful, severe, precise, and destructive.
That definitely signals an intent to escalate further. A tit-for-tat cycle that could easily spiral.
And when you look at just a raw human impact of all this, the details are incredibly stark.
They really are.
Powerful explosions reported rocking Tel Aviv's, likely Israeli defenses intercepting missiles, as you said.
Yeah, Iron Dome and others working overtime, presumably.
But some got through. In Petah Tikva, central Israel, Iranian missiles hit a residential building. 5 people died.
Including 2 women and 2 men in their 70s, the report said, and 92 wounded there.
And that detail about the 4-day-old baby, rescued by a paramedic, Dr. Gal Rosen, from a burning building, it brings home the human reality behind the numbers, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It underscores the devastating consequences for ordinary people caught in the middle. The Israeli police spokesman, Dean Elston, he emphasized, "We clearly see that our civilians are being targeted."
And yet you also see this resilience, or maybe hardened resolve. That Petah Tikva resident, Yoran Suki, his apartment was destroyed.
And he still urged Netanyahu to continue the attack, said, "It's totally worth it. This is for the sake of our children and grandchildren."
That reveals something deep about the mindset, doesn't it? Supporting continued conflict, even after immense personal loss.
It really does. Meanwhile, in Tehran, CBS News' Saeed Bathai reported hearing anti-aircraft fire.
Long traffic jams, people trying to flee the city.
Yeah, and an estimated 80 to 90% of businesses in the capital just closed. It paints a picture of a city under intense stress, fear, massive disruption.
The whole region feels like it's on a knife edge. And speaking of the wider picture, the U.S. response has been really central.
Front and center, yeah. President Trump cut his G7 trip in Canada short.
Citing what's going on in the Middle East, he posted on Truth Social, saying Iran should have signed the deal I told them to sign.
And urged people to evacuate Tehran immediately. Also reiterated Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. Very clear statements there.
And he pushed back against French President Macron's claim that he left the G7 to work on a ceasefire. Trump said it was much bigger than that.
Interesting framing. Very deliberate, signaling the gravity he attaches to this.
It is. But despite that kind of individual rhetoric, the G7 leaders, they did issue a joint statement. Trump signed it too.
Right. And that affirmed Israel's right to defend itself, supported its security, but also stressed protecting civilians.
And it identified Iran as the principal source of regional instability and terror, stated Iran can never have a nuclear weapon, but also urged broader de-escalation, including a ceasefire in Gaza.
So a kind of unified front on some key points, even with those different individual messages playing out.
And practically for Americans, the State Department raised the travel advisory for Israel to level 4, do not travel, highest level.
Yeah, and Ambassador Mike Huckabee reported some minor damage near the U.S. consulate in Tel Aviv from a missile, but thankfully no American personnel were hurt.
Also, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth directed more U.S. assets to the region over the weekend.
That's right. Refueling aircraft, the USS Nimitz Carrier Strike Group moved into the CNTCOM area. The stated reason to, quote, enhance our defensive posture.
It's not direct intervention, is it? But it's a clear signal, bolstering military readiness, maybe deterrence in the region.
Exactly. And speaking of signals and nuance, the U.S. State Department put out a very specific directive to embassies.
What did it say?
It clarified that the U.S. is not involved in Israel's unilateral action against targets in Iran and did not provide tanker support.
That's not just diplomatic speak, is it? What's the significance of publicly distancing like that?
Well, it really highlights this tightrope the U.S. is walking. On one hand, you have the G7 statement signed by Trump affirming Israel's right to self-defense.
Right.
On the other, the State Department clarification seems aimed at limiting direct U.S. entanglement, especially if actions are seen as unilateral by Israel.
So supporting an ally, but trying to manage escalation. Avoid getting dragged into something bigger.
Precisely, especially with hopes for de-escalation elsewhere like Gaza and maybe keeping channels open, even though
the planned U.S.-Iran talks on the nuclear program for Sunday got canceled because of the fighting.
Exactly. That's a direct casualty of this flare-up. And then there was that report, which Netanyahu's office called fake.
About President Trump allegedly opposing an Israeli plan to assassinate Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei.
Yeah. Whether true or not, the fact it was even reported shows the kind of extreme options potentially being discussed behind the scenes, a really volatile atmosphere.
Definitely. So wrapping this up, what does it all mean? We've taken this deep dive into what seems to be the most intense phase yet of the Israel-Iran conflict. 4 days now of open warfare.
We've looked at Israel's strikes, that dramatic hit on state TV, the evacuation warnings in Tehran, and then Iran's missile barrages hitting civilians in Israel.
Yeah, we consider the different casualty counts, the human cost, those personal stories that really ground the numbers.
And unpacked the strategic aims, Israel focusing on setting back the nuclear program, Iran vowing, severe retaliation.
And finally, we navigated that complex web of international reactions. President Trump's statements, the G7's unified stance on some points, U.S. military moves, but also that careful diplomatic distancing from Israel's specific actions. It's a really complex picture. Escalation, intent, international maneuvering, all happening at once.
Which really brings us to an important question moving forward.
As this conflict escalates, we're talking direct strikes on capital cities, undeniable civilian impacts on both sides. What are the long-term implications here for stability across the entire Middle East?
Yeah, and how might these increasingly direct clashes reshape the broader regional power dynamics? And what does it mean for the international community's approach to that whole nuclear proliferation debate? Especially that persistent question around Iran's nuclear program, the intent versus the actual capability.